100% real Reddit stories. Each story will keep you glued to the screen, unable to leave. You'll find the best selection of stories right here. Enjoy. Uncle Ned took my hand. "Thank you for coming, Silas," he said. I struggled to hold back the tears. Ned was my last living relative, and he was dying. This news had been given to me by his doctor in the small hallway at the end of the ICU a few minutes before. Uncle Ned and I had always been close. He was my mother's brother and like a second father to me. 2 years ago, as I watched the casket with my mother's body being lowered into the grave, Ned put his arm around me and said, "She's in a better world, son." Now it was just Ned and me, and he knew it was his turn. Since he got sick, I came to the hospital every day. He thought I came for him, but now I realize I came for me. Today he had a conversation with the doctor, and he said it was necessary to come early because he urgently needed to talk to me. I was going to come anyway. "I'll just be a little early," I said. When I arrived, Ned said in a voice growing weaker and weaker, "I need to talk to you about the pin money." Pin money was something of a family legend. They started with my great-grandfather, Silas, my namesake, whose father was a lawyer. But Silas wanted to be a farmer. His father was against it, but young Silas kept chickens behind the house of a wealthy family. This embarrassed the wealthy family a bit. Silas sold eggs and saved his money. When Silas turned 20, his father put a stop to it and said he'd had enough chickens. If Silas refused to pursue what his father thought was a suitable profession, he would be cut off from the family wealth. His father did not know that Silas was making considerable money from selling eggs. Silas left home and took a job on a farm. He became so successful at it that he reconciled with his family. Once independent, Silas always set aside the money from egg sales into a special fund. Eventually, he passed that money on to my grandfather as a kind of trust for future generations of the family. My grandfather had 2 children, my mother, Sonia, and my uncle Ned, to whom he entrusted the money for pins, as they were called. When the family had financial problems, my mother and Uncle Ned would say, "Let's take from the pin money," and then laugh hysterically. Perhaps it was that laughter that caused me to see pin money as a kind of joke. Ned was a lawyer, as was his grandfather, Silas's father. However, Ned always lived very frugally, in a small house, having very modest needs. He never married, often saying he would when he found a woman as good as his mother or sister, but I guess he never did. "Uncle," I said, "if there's nothing in the pin fund, I don't care. I'm here for you, not for the money." "I know, that's why I called you. You're going to marry Nancy next month, and no matter how good she seems or how beautiful she is, there's something about her I can't trust. They say you don't know your spouse until you've been married a long time," Ned said, and then paused before continuing. "At home, in my writing desk, you will find the will and all the information about Silas Stevenson's family trust. Please don't tell your wife about this until you have full confidence in her and have been married to her for at least 5 years. Promise me that, and I will go to my eternal rest in peace." What was I to do? I had given my uncle the word he sought. I thought it was a small, unimportant matter. I was to be convinced that I was greatly mistaken. I stayed with my uncle for another hour or so. During that time, he seemed to have fallen asleep, but then the monitors beeped and buzzed. My Uncle Ned left to join my mother and his mother. 3 days later, I buried my uncle in the family plot next to my mom and dad. There, in the small cemetery outside of Messina, were their parents, as was the rest of the family. Nancy, my fiancée, didn't attend the funeral. She had final exams. Nancy was a 4th-year medical student at the time. Nancy and I had been together for about 2 years. She and Uncle Ned could never get along. Nancy can be a little standoffish. She is a very goal-oriented person. Ever since she was in high school, she had her sights set on becoming a doctor and made any sacrifice to do so. It's made her a little socially depressed. She's pretty. Some might even say beautiful. 5'6", shoulder-length blonde hair. She has the figure of a cheerleader but the personality of a computer geek. She wasn't the best at math, which is why we met. In college, I was a tutor for those who were having trouble with higher math. Nancy was assigned to me. She needed good grades to get into medical school, which meant not just passing higher math, but doing very well. Somehow, we just found common ground. My goal was to teach. We both had a passion for helping others. Neither of us had much relationship experience. We started what I would call study dates, getting together for classes and ending them at a coffee shop. Gradually, we started squeezing on the way home. The night I received the news of my mother's death, I was with Nancy. The next day, I asked her to marry me, but we postponed the wedding until I finished university and found a teaching job. A week after Ned's funeral, I opened my uncle's desk drawer and found that he had left me a great burden. There, neatly laid out, lay his last will and the papers of a trust of which I was the sole beneficiary. The monthly statements from banks and brokers spoke for themselves. There were nearly $7 million in the Stevenson family trust. Nancy and I lived together for a few years while she finished college. I got my teaching credential, and we were scheduled to get married the very next month. I had to support us on my teacher's salary while she finished her degree. She had a long way to go as she wanted to become a surgeon. The money I inherited would have made life easier, but I promised to keep it a secret. Besides, I viewed the PIN money as a kind of personal obligation to be passed on to our children. I didn't tell Nancy about the trust fund, but instead took the money to an investment company in Manhattan. If we needed anything, I took money from the fund, always giving the impression that I had borrowed the money and was struggling to pay it back. To some extent, this was true. I intended to return the money to the trust as soon as possible. Her parents had arranged a beautiful wedding for us, but I refused their offer to pay for the honeymoon. I took us to an expensive Caribbean resort, telling Nancy that Uncle Ned had bequeathed the honeymoon funds to me, and it was true. For the first few years of our marriage, I saw Nancy very rarely. She seemed to be studying all the time. But when we were together, life was good, very good. My career eventually kept me very busy. I worked as a public school teacher in an upscale neighborhood where I taught second grade. With my math background, I could have taught high school and even gone on to get a college degree and become a college professor. However, my aspirations were focused on making a difference in the lives of my students. My heart told me that the best way to do this was to teach young children. Nancy did not understand the nature of my calling, but at first accepted it. As I said, when she was in medical school and I was teaching young children, we were very happy. I looked forward to someday having children of our own as well. Eventually, Nancy graduated and was interning at a local medical center. I went from seeing her too infrequently to almost none at all. However, I understood that she was working toward a goal and believed that when her internship was over, we would be truly together. Soon, however, she left for residency. Before I knew it, we'd been married for 5 years. It was time to tell Nancy about the PIN money, but something was holding me back. I knew I should tell her, but something kept me silent. Finally, I admitted to myself that I didn't trust my wife. She was ambitious and all too aware of her position in society. I told myself that in time she would mature, and then I could solve the mystery of the PIN money. Nancy finished her residency and began a career as a surgeon. I thought we'd see each other more often, but that didn't happen. However, Nancy's income increased significantly, and soon she was talking about buying a house. I took this as a good sign that we were planning to have children. Nancy insisted on buying an expensive house in a fashionable neighborhood that she felt would fit her new inflated status. "I'm a surgeon," she told me, "and this is the home of a successful doctor." The house was a classic mansion, taking up too much land and having an interior design that created a lot of useless space. The house had a detached 3-car garage, which Nancy soon filled with an expensive luxury car and a 4-wheel drive all-terrain vehicle. Our little Subaru, which I drove, was squeezed into the third space. My assumption that it was time to think about children was discarded. "We had just gained our freedom. Children will bind us together. It's time to savor our success," she objected. However, we didn't enjoy our freedom. At least not me. I spent many lonely nights and weekends in a big, empty house. We lived in a postcard neighborhood where houses stand close together, but people are far apart. Nancy supposedly didn't work nights or weekends, but I began to suspect there was more than just work involved. Out of boredom, I started working weekends at a local daycare center and spending my nights chatting on the internet. It was this latter activity that led to a strange development. I usually attended education-oriented groups where we discussed current trends in the field. One night, a newcomer showed up with an unusual and very specific question. "It's Hermes," he wrote. Does anyone know of an educational program called Doctrina? I'd be interested in your thoughts. The chat room I was in that evening consisted mostly of school administrators. They had heard of the educational program he mentioned. It was a sophisticated package of computer programs for elementary school-age children that was much publicized in the press at the time. Most of the administrators in the chat room that night were absolutely thrilled. As it happened, however, my school had become a testing ground, and I knew the program was useless. Technology, I commented, is all very well, but doctrine requires a large investment in equipment for almost all schools. Even in the most affluent schools, there are only 1 or 2 computers for every junior high class. Using this software product, on the other hand, requires a large investment for modest gains. This excludes public schools and all but a few elite private schools. However, if you spend a small fortune to educate your child in a private school, do you want him or her to be taught by a machine? What about homeschooling? Hermes asked. I had thoughts on that, and soon he suggested we chat privately. We spent the next 4 hours discussing Doctrina's chances of success in education. It was already 2 in the morning when we passed out. However, my wife was still not home. She came in around 3 and stumbled her way into our bedroom. I pretended to be asleep. She had obviously been drinking, and therefore not working. She threw her clothes in the laundry basket and headed for the bathroom next to the bedroom. Before leaving for work the next day, I checked the laundry basket. Nancy was still asleep. Supposedly, she worked the 4 to midnight shift, but I had my doubts. The clothes in the basket were not the kind of clothes one wears to work, especially the fancy underwear stained with sex marks. All the faith I had harbored in my wife was lost. I spent the next 2 weeks walking around like a fog, wondering what had become of my life and trying to determine its future course. What had gone wrong? Was it something I did or didn't do? Was it one man or many? Should I talk openly with her? Should we try to see a counselor? There were so many questions, but no easy answers. It was little Jeffrey Anderson who brought me out of this state. He was a bright boy, but he was having a hard time. He had obvious reading and diction problems. I suspected a learning disability. Our school did not have the facilities for adequate testing. We did do testing, but it was purely routine. I knew his parents had resources, informed them of my suspicions at a parent-teacher conference, and recommended some reliable sources that could help them. As it turned out, Jeffrey had a problem and needed extra help to overcome it. Jeffrey's help was able to take my mind off the problems in my marriage. At the end of the assessment and intervention meeting, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson thanked me. Mrs. Anderson hugged me and said, "You are a wonderful person. Your wife is a very happy woman, although she doesn't seem to realize it. Mrs. Anderson is a nurse supervisor at the hospital where my wife works, and her husband is a prominent attorney." Jack Anderson then shook my hand and said, "If you ever need anything, Silas, please don't hesitate to ask." I left feeling like a giant. I was at the pinnacle of my profession. At this point, I received a cryptic text from Hermes asking me to stop by the discussion forum late at night for a private chat. The next text was from my wife informing me that she would be late again that evening. I stopped by the message board at about 11 o'clock in the evening. Hermes was already waiting for me there. "Hey, master," he began. "I owe you a favor. That deal with Doctrine fell through. You saved me a lot of money." "I'm glad, but is that what you do? Investing?" "Yes, I started out as a day trader with family money, but almost lost it all. However, I met this guy who manages a fund that invests in startups. I've been investing with him for about 3 years now. He doesn't always hit his target, but when he does, it's a nice income stream. He was pushing this doctrine until I enlightened him. He's grateful for the help you've given us. Glad I could help. Listen, I've been discussing this with a friend of mine, and we have an urgent proposal. If you're interested, I can give you a portion of my option. The minimum option is $500,000. I'll give you part of mine, any amount you want, up to $5,000, he said. Well, I guess I could put some of the money from the fund into pins, I typed. Ha ha, money for pins is good. I didn't know this guy outside of my message board interactions, but something nudged me that night. I was on the cusp of success with Jeffrey Anderson, and at the bottom of the abyss because I felt that Mrs. Anderson knew what my wife was up to behind my back. "You know, friend," I wrote, "I'll come in, but I want a full share. 500,000, really? You're a teacher? Like I said, I've got money for pins. Pins. Who would have thought it? But what's the name of this company? The company is called Odeo, but we invest in its subsidiary. They call it Twitter. Yeah, I realize. Stupid name. The name was very silly, but I think you realize what happened. I got involved in something I had no idea about. If Hermes had explained what it was, I would have passed it by, of course. In my opinion, using such a silly name was a stupid idea. It should have been the first of several stupid ideas. Sometimes they failed, but when they hit, the payoff was big. 5 years after buying Twitter, I was watching my wife from across the ballroom. My relationship with Nancy and I had gone south. This time we were at a fundraiser and holiday party for the hospital. Everyone was in formal wear except the teacher. I was in my best blue suit and could sense my wife's embarrassment. For her part, she was hanging on the arm of a young surgeon, her latest lover. Soon the dancing would begin and she would be in his arms, dancing too close for it to be decent. I should have cared, but divorce was definitely in the plans. The problem was, at this point, I was too rich. I was richer than any man had a right to be. I was hiding my wealth, but I couldn't see how it wouldn't surface in the divorce and disrupt my life. Such was the strange set of circumstances that brought me to this place in my life. I had secretly used the pin money for good causes, but was careful not to reveal my possession of the money. However, fate had not yet done away with the money or with me. "Mr. Stevenson," said the woman, taking my hand. I turned my attention away from watching my wife and saw Mrs. Anderson beside me. "Oh, hello, Mary," I said. "I should have known you were here. Congratulations on your appointment as head of nursing. Thank you, and if you don't mind, I'd like to introduce you to a few people." She led me to a small group. "My husband, Jack, you know, and this is Leslie Dumont, the president of our hospital. Her husband, Arthur, and Donna—" "Miller," I said, interrupting her. "We're old acquaintances." Mary turned to Donna. "Oh, you know Mr. Stevenson?" "Yes," Donna said. "Silas is a volunteer at the daycare center I use. I'm afraid I've imposed on him as a traveling companion several times, being late for appointments." Donna was a short woman with a rounded figure, not fat, but with wide hips and ample breasts. Like the old drawings of sexy forest nymphs I thought the first time I saw her. I was mesmerized by her silky black hair, cut short and framing her beautiful round face. She had 2 children at the daycare center where I volunteered. She was a registered nurse at the hospital, working weekends to avoid night shifts. She lacked help at home as her husband had died 2 years before. Weekend daycare is very limited and difficult to maintain due to decreased demand and significant costs. Our daycare operated 7 days a week thanks to a grant from a mysterious foundation with a strange name, the Pin Foundation. "It never hurts to help a beautiful woman in need," I said, eliciting laughter from the group and a shy, embarrassed smile from Donna. That's when attorney Jack Anderson entered the conversation, saying, "Very well said and obviously true, as it comes from the best educator I know. One who is dedicated to excellence." Now, it was my turn to blush embarrassedly. But Mary Anderson immediately began explaining to Donna and Mr. and Mrs. Dumont how I had noticed Jeffrey's learning problems and helped develop an intervention plan for him. "Jeffrey is moving on to middle school next year, and thanks to this man, he is the best in his class," she said, leaning over and hugging me. "Excellence in one's profession is something we all strive for, but few of us achieve," Arthur Dumont pointed out. Then Mrs. Dumont added, "Some, however, allow themselves to be led by their base natures." Saying this, Leslie Dumont looked across the room to where my wife had begun to dance with her new lover. I didn't consider my wife's activities to be completely secret, but it seemed at the time that she was much more widely known than I had assumed. At this point, Donna said, "I am going to make up my mind and ask this fine gentleman to dance." That's how I first held Donna Miller in my arms, a woman who, from that moment on, seemed to perfectly fill the space between my arms and the void in my life. I drove Donna home that evening, leaving my wife to make her own way to the house we sometimes shared. Donna lived in a small house cut into a hill on a side street. She invited me in for coffee. I watched her lovingly check on her children sleeping in their cribs. Then she paid the young girl sitting with them, pulling money out of a small purse in her lady's purse. When she handed the girl the money, the purse remained empty. I noticed once again how often there is a distinction between domestic happiness and financial well-being. We sat in her kitchen until the wee hours of the morning drinking coffee. I encouraged her to tell me about her life. She told me about her childhood and nursing school, and then how she met her husband and fell in love. Told me about how she gave birth to first a son and then a daughter. It all flowed out of her like a spring river rushing to the sea. Then the dam burst and she slowly told me about the tragic death of her husband. She and the children were in the car with him, traveling to visit his elderly mother, when a truck slammed into them, killing him and injuring her. Thankfully, the kids were safe in the back seat, but Jason died and I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The truck belonged to some corporation that had little insurance. The payments for Jason soon ran out because of our living expenses that first year. She tried to gloss over the difficulties she faced after her husband died, but I wouldn't let her. Forced her to tell me everything, knowing that telling me would lighten her burden. "I don't know what I would have done without the discounted daycare that the center where you work gave me," she said. "I wonder how they manage that." "Oh, I said, "people like me donate some time and parents like you help out. Besides, we have benefactors." "Yes, I'm very grateful to you," she said, covering my hand with hers and squeezing it. "And I'm very grateful to this Pinwheel Foundation. I must write to them and tell them how much they have helped me and how grateful I am to them." "Oh, I'm sure they know that." "Well, I'd like to tell them anyway," she said. "Could you give me their address?" "I'll work on it," I said. "But it's very late and I've got to go." "I think you're wrong," she smiled. "In fact, it's very early. But I'll let you go if you promise to come back and tell me all about yourself instead of letting me do all the talking like I did last night." I made that promise and I was actually going to go back. My wife was waiting for me at home that evening. She was furious and determined to fight, but I had no reason to give her what she wanted. "Look, I'm tired, and no matter what you say, I'm going to bed." "Oh, no, you're not! You can't just leave me without a word at a public event. How did you expect me to get home?" "I expected your boyfriend to drive you home," I said, throwing her a look that I hoped said I knew about her extramarital affairs. "How dare you throw around accusations like that? Like I said, I'm tired, and this is not an accusation, but a fact known to most, if not all, of your coworkers. You and, I believe his name is Dr. Anthony Vincent, have been behaving very publicly for months. Tonight, you flaunted it in front of your colleagues. Tony's a friend, and that's all. Well, I assume your friend gave you a ride home. If you had any sense, you'd know that Tony rides a motorcycle, and that's not what I was dressed for." "Nancy," I sighed, "can't you realize that I don't care anymore?" "Why?" "I guess you have something with that slut you left with tonight." With those words, I turned sharply. She nearly fell down the stairs, not expecting me to run into her. "Donna Miller is not a whore. She is a widow and a mother, a decent woman that people like you don't understand." She hadn't expected me to defend Donna, and as she grabbed the banister to keep from falling, I saw something flush across her face. A mixture of fear and loss. But then she got her anger back, and when we reached the top of the stairs, she said, "You hate me because of my success." At the door to our bedroom, I turned to her again, but not with anger, but with curiosity. "What makes you think I hate you?" I asked. "Because I'm an outstanding surgeon and you're an unimportant schoolteacher." I could only shake my head as I entered the bedroom and got ready for bed. Apparently, she had decided she had scored a point with her last statement. "It's all mine, she asserted. "The house and everything in it, the Mercedes and SUV, the money in the bank accounts, and our 401k are all on my income. But not the money in the PIN fund. Not a single dollar came from her out of the tens of millions in the fund, which earned more in a week than she did in a year. Nor could she claim full ownership of the rest of our property purchased with my teaching salary. Yet I felt only disappointment that she had put things ahead of love in our marriage." "Why, Nancy?" I asked. "How can you be so fixated on material things?" Saying this, I thanked Uncle Ned for his advice. I kept the money for the pins a secret because I couldn't be sure of my wife. I walked into the bathroom in the master bedroom and closed the door behind me. Nancy first jerked the door open and then yelled through it, "In the divorce, I'll make sure you don't get anything." Then, thank goodness, she quieted down. She was gone when I finished in the bathroom and went back to the bedroom. I shrugged and went to bed. The day after Thanksgiving, Nancy actually put a knife in our marriage. We spent the holiday at her parents' house, and my Nancy pretended we were a loving couple. When the food was served and her mother finally sat down at the table, The first words out of her mouth that everyone in the family heard were, "Silas, when can I see my grandchildren?" "Ask your daughter," I replied. Nancy threw me an angry look and then began her standard answer about how we should wait until her career was more successful. At the end, her mother gave her standard advice that we shouldn't wait too long. The next day, Nancy assured us that we had waited too long. "I'm leaving for Christmas vacation," she informed me. "And where do you suggest we go?" I asked. "Not us," she said. "I'm going with a friend." "It's a male friend, I suppose." "None of your business," she hissed. "Well, it's not Tony Vincent, because I heard he dumped you for a younger model." She became furious and ran out of the house. I sat around for a while, and then I decided to call a travel agent. "Yes, I can book this trip," the woman informed me, "but I must warn you that it can get very expensive during Christmas week, and that's not including park and ride entrance fees. Just make the reservation, but don't make a final commitment until the woman says yes," I told her. Over the past year, I had been seeing Donna quite a bit, often taking her and the kids out to dinner when she came to pick them up from daycare on weekends. The kids already knew me well. They are Daryl, age 6, and Cheyenne, age 4. Daryl was named after his paternal grandfather, and Cheyenne was named after Donna's mother. Although Donna and I became close, there was no physical connection. It wasn't that I was holding back for some false moral reason. As far as I was concerned, I owed nothing to Nancy or our marriage. But I could sense the conflict within Donna. The good wife was still trying to recover from her husband's death. It was in that vein that I asked Donna and her children to come with me to Disneyland in Florida during Christmas week. I first suggested to Donna, doing it in the absence of the kids. She initially declined. "Do you think that's reasonable?" she asked. "If you're worried about my wife, you shouldn't be." She informed me that she would be vacationing with a friend. "No, that's not my concern," Donna said. "I was thinking about expenses." "Well, don't worry. I have money set aside for such occasions." When we told the kids about it, they were thrilled, but it occurred to me that Donna already knew that my wife wouldn't be a problem. I had to find out what she knew. I did one more thing, called and hired a private detective firm, a large and well-resourced one, to follow my wife on her trip. Again, they reminded me of the expense there, and I assured them it was a non-issue. "How about I send you a deposit of $25,000 and you would bill me weekly?" After arranging to have my wife followed, I prepared for the end of the school semester and vacation. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to Christmas. We flew out to Orlando on Christmas Eve. The trip with 2 small children was exhausting. The room I booked had 2 large bedrooms, and one of them, along with the kids, was occupied by Donna. I slept alone in the double bed. Early in the morning on Christmas Day, the kids woke us up in a hurry to get going. We spent the day on rides and wandering around the park. By late afternoon, however, everyone was exhausted. It had been a hectic day at the park, but I hoped the crowds would be less by the end of the ride. Shortly after an early dinner, first Cheyenne and then Daryl fell asleep. I opened a bottle of wine from room service, and Donna and I settled on the couch. Donna took a sip and then bowed out. I figured she was tired and was going to go to bed. Donna came back in a simple short baby doll-style nightie. I was stunned and barely managed to whisper, "What the hell?" "Oh, you don't like it?" she teased, spreading the hem and spinning around a bit. The first time I saw her, I thought she looked a bit like a classic sexy nymph. But after seeing her like this, I realized she was the sexiest nymph ever. When she finished her little pirouette, I jumped up and hugged her. The sex that followed defies description. There seemed to be no end to our passion, and that's because it wasn't just passion. Each of us knew the other had fallen in love, even without having sex. We had moved to that state of physical intimacy that many strive for, but few achieve. Early in the morning, exhausted, we lay there in each other's arms, and I asked, "Why now, Donna?" "Because," she replied, "I love you, have wanted you for a long time and knew you wanted me. But you respected him and me enough to wait. I knew that the man she was talking about was her dead husband. We slept afterward, and it wasn't until later, almost on the last day, sitting in a small cafe drinking overpriced coffee, that I asked her what she knew about my wife's new friend. Her children were playing nearby, and she was watching them and speaking, not looking at me. It's Dr. Sherman, and I'm afraid it's going to be a bit of a scandal. Isn't that Thomas Sherman, the chief physician of the hospital? Yes, she said, the Thomas Sherman. But he's happily married and he must be at least 15 years older than Nancy, I objected. More like 20, and rumor has it he was just having an affair with a younger woman until his wife caught him in bed with her and kicked him out. Now it is said that he is trying to look wholesome, but no one believes he'll last long with a hospital whore, she opined. Then, realizing exactly what she had said about my wife, she turned to me with a flaming face and apologized. Don't worry. She is exactly that and more, I admitted. I didn't feel like driving home, but I knew we had to do it. We got home on New Year's Eve, just in time to celebrate the balloon drop in Times Square. I didn't go home that night, but stayed at Donna's. My wife returned the next day, only an hour after I arrived. She looked good and tanned, clearly after a vacation in the sun. I think her own tan prevented her from noticing mine. At any rate, we didn't exchange a welcoming kiss. The cool atmosphere persisted between us until February, when I came home from school and found her sitting in our living room. I knew what her problem was. I kept following her. News of the affair between the chief physician and the surgeon had reached the hospital trustees, and one of the lovers had to go. The whore was chosen. She wanted me to comfort her, but I found it difficult to do so. She also tried to regain my favor. However, as they say, the ship had sailed. In April, my marriage to Nancy came to an abrupt end. I waited for her to get back on her feet professionally before I demanded a divorce. Her return to her vocation did not come easily. The hospitals in our region knew of her reputation and wanted nothing to do with her. She finally found a position at a small hospital that specialized in bariatric surgery for weight loss to survive in the current healthcare environment. The chief surgeon was a woman, and Nancy became her assistant. I assumed this was a significant reduction in prestige, but probably not in salary. Anyway, the whole thing blew up over something on my part. At first, Donna and I tried to take precautions. Upon returning from Florida, Donna started taking pills, or rather some kind of patch. I am not knowledgeable enough to know what went wrong, but she became pregnant, and my happiness was unbounded. Since she worked at the hospital, the news got out quickly. I came home from school one afternoon intending to change and go to Donna's house. There was Nancy waiting for me. "Well, you got the little wench pregnant," she accused me. I just shrugged and replied, "Yes, and we're very happy about it." As I suspected, this made Nancy mad, and she started calling Donna and me names. When she calmed down a bit, I said as calmly as I could, "This should be no more humiliating to you than your status as a noble whore is to me. But if you want to soften the pain, I suggest you divorce me as soon as possible." "You're a bastard," she scolded. "You're not even ashamed." As for me, I have nothing to be ashamed of. I'll report the affair and call the little mother your mistress. "No, you won't," I laughed. "You see, I have photographs. I've been following you since Christmas before last. I especially like the set of pictures of you and Tom Sherman on a nude beach in St. Martin. If they get on the internet, whatever reputation you have left will evaporate." "You wouldn't dare," she said. "Try it." Afterward, I left and headed straight for Jack Anderson's office. He had been waiting for me for quite some time. Sitting in his office, he said, "You do realize, don't you, that she's going to demand everything? She can have everything but the PIN money, but it's clear I want to do it quickly," I said. "She can't get to the PIN trust. It's irrevocable, and you followed my advice to transfer your financial income into it gradually over time," Jack replied. "Okay, let's do it." Donna wasn't so optimistic. "How can you give her everything? You have to fight it. I'll lend you money for lawyers. I can get a second mortgage on this house. I don't care about my reputation, but I'm not going to let you go broke on my account. I brought a bottle of expensive champagne." "Let me pour you a glass. You'll probably need it," I said. She was sitting at the kitchen table and got up to stop me. "No," she demanded. "I'm pregnant and we can't afford it." "Just one glass," I said, gently nudging her into a chair. Once seated and some wine poured into her, I got down on my knee and said, "Donna Miller, will you agree to marry me? And then I'll tell you about the PIN money." She frowned, but nodded her head in agreement to my proposal, muttering, "Money for pins, that's the real thing." And I began to tell her, it all started with my great-grandfather Silas.
Thank you for listening to the entire story. If you enjoyed the video, Please hit the like button and subscribe for more exciting stories. Until next time,